This is the week of the Trump wrap-up. The show trial in New York comes to a conclusion. I have paid attention to Andy McCarthy the most, the McCarthy Report, Jonathan Turley when I've seen him, and then I've read everything Byron has written, because though Byron is not a lawyer, you've worked pretty hard at understanding this, Byron. You threw yourself into this. Am I correct?
I have, and like 332 million of my fellow Americans, I am not a lawyer. And I actually think that maybe there's some perspective to be had for a non-lawyer to kind of jump into something like this.
I think you were remarkably perceptive on many things, and I have not paid that much attention because I think it's a foregone conclusion that he's going to be convicted because it's a Manhattan jury. You don't share? Do you share my skepticism of Manhattan juries and Donald Trump?
Yeah, I do. I will say that when the case started, I would have said absolutely 100% conviction. Now I would put it somewhere below 100% with a possibility of a hung jury, but I still think a conviction is most likely.
Yeah, so do I. Now, I want to read to you from ABC News this morning. The trial judge, Merchan, ruled against requiring prosecutors to specifically identify the underlying crime they believe Trump committed. But jurors will need to have a solid grasp on what that alleged underlying crime is in order to decide whether Trump is guilty of the felony charges. In fact, that's a close quote. I don't think they're going to need a solid grasp of anything because Merchan has not told them that. I mean, that's the biggest hole in the Swiss cheese of a case, Byron.
Well, what they're referring to, and I should say, I should praise the New York court system, which, unlike any other trial that I remember, has posted the transcripts of the court proceedings. They're usually about a day and a half late after they happen, but still you get to see them. And so they posted the transcript of what happened last Tuesday, a week ago today, where after the sides had finished presenting their evidence and had rested, there was just a meeting with the judge and the two sides going over what the jury instructions would be. So we have the transcript of that. And one of the things that you and I have talked about, a lot of people have talked about, is what is the other crime going to be? Because as we all know, the original crime, falsifying the documents, is a misdemeanor. The only way you can make it into a felony is to say it was done with the intent to commit or to cover up another crime. So, okay, what's the other crime? And we all thought that there would be some big reveal, and they would say, well, the other crime is 173.67, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's not. In court papers outside the jury, over the course of the whole trial and months ago, the prosecution offered several theories, and that's what they call them, theories, about what the other crime might be, but said, look, we don't have to actually say, we don't have to pick one. And what we saw in the debate the other day in front of the judge was that the other crime is going to be a multiple choice question. The jury does not have to be unanimous about what the other crime was. And the prosecution is going to give them a few to pick from. Oh, do you think it was what they call a FICA violation? This just sounds horrible, but it's a violation of the Federal Election Campaign Act. Or do you think it was a violation of this New York State campaign law that would also involve the federal law? Or do you think it was something completely separate? It was like a tax violation. And so pick which one you like. You don't have to all agree. It doesn't have to be unanimous. You can just pick which one you like as the other crime, and then you can convict Trump. So that's what the ABC report was referring to.
And it's astonishing to me. Now, I do not teach criminal procedure, and when I say I teach con law, we do not do the Fifth Amendment and the Seventh Amendment and the Sixth Amendment in con law. That's left to criminal procedure. But what I know, I've only defended one criminal defendant, is that you need to know what you're charged with. It is a basic rule of due process everywhere that if you do not know what you're charged with, you cannot mount a defense. Do you think Donald Trump is going to win on that on appeal because they did not specify this, Byron? Again, you're not a lawyer, but you've been following it very closely. Yeah,
that's where being an experienced lawyer would help me, and I'm not. The case that the prosecutors put up is a case from like 40 years ago that involved a burglary, and apparently when people are accused in New York are accused of breaking into a building, there's this assumed intent that you broke into the building to steal something or to do something bad. So the fact that you broke into the building is kind of convicts you of another crime, the intent to do this or do that. And the prosecution is saying, well, that's what we have here. Obviously, he called these expenses for Michael Cohen, he called them legal expenses. So that means he meant to corrupt the 2016 election. Now, it doesn't follow in my...
It makes no sense.
But there you go. That's a better way of saying it. And so, will the jury buy that? I don't know. But that's the reason. I think there's something really interesting going on here about there are people in the anti-Trump side who believe if something can be done, not whether it's a good idea, but if it just can be done, if it's allowed under the law, then they ought to do it. And there was an interesting interview that George Conway, who was a conservative lawyer and now is a Biden mega donor, as a matter of fact, was talking about the cases against Trump. And he said, look, Trump has done so many terrible things. He doesn't deserve any benefit of the doubt. And, quote, whatever they can get him for is fine with me.
Yeah.
I think that's a very representative statement.
I want to ask you about people like George, Byron. I think they're going to be on the jury. And that's why I don't think, even if they got lucky and they got one or two rational people, I think they will be hectored into voting to convict. And because TDS, I'm sure you've run into TDS, it's a real thing. People lose their mind when they talk about Trump. I had a former senior White House official tell me he was amazed at how many people were simply broken by Donald Trump. And by broken, he meant they did not act rationally after the success of Trump in November of 2016. Their sunk costs weighed them down. George Conway is one of the people who are broken by Donald Trump. And if there's one or two of those in the jury room, how do you think they'll make people mad, or do you think they'll just hector people into giving up?
I think that's the great question. First of all, you have to assume that the majority of people will be kind of that way, and the only thing that could save Trump is because there's a requirement that the verdict be unanimous. One thing I worry about, which I thought, which I've read is unusual. We've been talking about lawyers. There are apparently two lawyers on the jury.
Yes.
And that doesn't usually happen. And I'm not sure exactly how it did happen in this case, but it did. And I'm wondering, I think how the lawyers view this case, the two lawyers view this case, is going to be really important because they might be quite influential in the jury. Because I'll tell you, the most commonly mentioned other crime is a violation of this New York state election law that says it's illegal to promote an election by unlawful means. So it requires another sort of crime. Well, what are the unlawful means? Well, they had this debate that I was talking about before the judge, and the question was, well, do the unlawful means have to be a criminal? I mean, do they have to be a crime? And the prosecution said, no. Obviously, it says unlawful. It doesn't say criminal. So it could be, a lot of the violations that are before the Federal Election Commission are handled in as civil matters. And one campaign has to pay a fine for doing this or doing that. And the prosecution is saying, well, that's okay. That if you look at it like that, there really doesn't have to be another crime. It could just be like a civil violation. And then one thing I will tell you, I think we can say, is that if the jury convicts Trump based on any part on some alleged violation of the Federal Election Campaign Act, they won't understand what they're doing.
Sometime between 1998 and 2003, I was on a jury. I can't remember. It was a long time ago. It was a three strikes case for a guy who had carjacked a couple of cars and assaulted people and drove the wrong way on two freeways in L.A. It was all on helicopter video. Guy was dead to rights. It was a hung jury because the prosecution had mailed it in and they left the public defender's spouse on, and there was no way he was going to convict this guy. Although the rest of us, but I was on the jury, and I could not believe I ended up on the jury. In fact, towards the end, the judge said, "Is there anything else the jury needs to tell before we impanel you?" I put my hand up and said, "Your Honor, I was a prosecutor. I was trying to get off the jury. I didn't want to be on the jury. It was going to be 3 weeks. I didn't want to be on the jury. I had to teach. I had clients, all this stuff." And I said, "I'm aware of that, Mr. Hewitt. Any objection to the defense counsel?" "No objection, Your Honor." So I was on that jury. Before we went in, the judge, who I will not name, except his first name was Richard said, "Now, Professor Hewitt, you are not to take over the jury room." I said, "Your Honor, I'm not going to say anything." And I didn't, but I observed the strangest, weirdest, wildest thing I've ever seen. It was just we were hung, and so it took 2 weeks to get through it. 3-day trial, 2 weeks of deliberations, hung jury. They retried the guy in 2 weeks, and we had fingerprint evidence, we had everything. Guilty, guilty, guilty. But I said nothing because of the judge. So I found the defense counsel afterwards and said, "Why did you leave me on the jury?" He said, "Well, I watch you on TV. I was hoping you would piss somebody off." That was his entire reasoning. And I said nothing. And the guy said, "But, it was worth a shot. I got a hung jury," because it's a 3-striker. You never plead to a third 3-strike in California. You're going away for life. I don't know how these guys will conduct themselves. They're both men. One of them, I think, is an IP lawyer, and one is a trial lawyer. But I do think it's going to have blowback on their practice. What do you think? Do you think we'll know the names of the jurors?
No, I don't think we will. I think that there may be a juror who wants publicity and who comes forward. I kind of doubt that in this case because it is so hot. But another issue you raise, you keep saying, I've only tried one case, blah blah blah. There are lots of different types of jurors, and you said one of them's an IP.
Intellectual property lawyer.
Yeah, and so. And like George Conway, for example, we were talking about, did all sorts of mergers and acquisitions sort of law. I think a very lucrative practice, but it's not really, sort of bonfire of the vanities guys coming through.
Oh, I love Tom. He's my favorite lawyer in fiction other than Jaggers in Great Expectations.
But anyway, there's a lot of people who have law degrees. And they're talking about this case like they're really quite experienced with it. And I have to say, the only people who've really, I think, have the experience to talk about it are people who've been argued cases in that court, in Manhattan, in New York State. So,
in fact, when Andy McCarthy says he has more confidence in Manhattan jurors than most people, I give him Andy knows what he's talking about. That's most of the talking heads on TV have no idea, and they haven't even paid attention. They have pre-designed opinions, Byron. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, right. So these are doctors, and these are lawyers, but they're not. It's like my ophthalmologist. I've broken my ankle, and I go to my ophthalmologist. He says, well. He probably says, you need to find somebody who can deal with it.
You need to go find an orthopedic surgeon. I think that trial judge Mershon, I don't want to call him justice, I don't want to confuse people, is going to have reversible error tattooed on his forehead when he's done with this. But, Byron, that doesn't matter. The jurors don't know this. Do you think the jurors are following the case in the media because they're not sequestered?
Yeah, no, I think my feeling is even if they have the best of motives, and they really try, it would be impossible to just avoid. Were we in the 7th week now? It'd be impossible to avoid the wall-to-wall coverage that you're seeing and the discussions that you're seeing. And I'm sure their friends or people they're close to know they're on the jury because it's probably something they couldn't hide for people who actually are involved in their life for 7 weeks. So I just think even if they have the best of motives, they can't do it. I've seen suggestions that it should have been sequestered after both sides rested, and now we're going to enter into deliberations. But that didn't happen either. So I agree with you about Judge Mershon. It seems like there's lots of reasons the courts would take a look at this.
Oh, my God. His handling of Costello and his shutdown of Brad Smith, These are the two reasons I think, other than the charging. But Byron, we were on Larry Kudlow together, and I pointed out in the course of I referenced Judge Smales. I don't know if you know who Judge Smales is, but he's the Caddyshack judge played by Ted Knight. What do you think of the reputation of Judge Merchan after this?
Well, if Trump is convicted, then Judge Merchan's reputation is fine. I mean, in New York, it's absolutely fine. I mean, one thing I was going to note about the appeals is that even if Trump wins on appeal, it'll be long after the election.
Yep.
And so if there is a conviction, in this week in May, that will certainly stand all the way through the election on November 5th. That'll be where things stand on him. He's a convicted felon, 34 felony counts. Who knows? They may have put him in jail for some period of time. But,
well, that's what I wanted to ask. Do you think Merchan is looking for the picture of Trump in cuffs? And do you think, because normally you would release you would set sentencing for 3 months hither and you would dismiss him and he would leave the courtroom. But I'm afraid this judge is so deranged, he may want the picture.
Well, I think it's among the TDS set that we're talking about. I mean, they would love to see Trump in cuffs, but I think there's this feeling that if Jack Smith had been able to convict Trump of either the classified documents case or the election in January 6th case, then incarcerating him, while it was pending appeal or something like that, would have been a great thing. I think that even the TDS types would be a little bit disturbed about this. There are a number of people on Twitter who complain when I say that Trump is facing 34 felonies and a maximum of 136 years in jail. And they say, well, that's crazy. Don't you know the sentencing guideline, first-time offender, blah, blah, blah. He'll only get a small period of time in jail, which is, of course, still outrageous because it's in this case. But the fact is, and you and I have talked about it, Alvin Bragg chose to charge 34 felonies, each with a maximum of 4 years in prison, and that's 136 years. And
Byron,
McCarthy talks about, yeah. Mm-hmm.
My last question is, if you're Todd Blanche and you're making the final argument, and I think it's going to be Todd Blanche, do you remind the jury that the eyes of the world and history are upon them, that this has never happened before, and that not only is this reasonable doubt, this is almost a super reasonable doubt because it's a political trial against a president, a former president who's running for president again? Do you drive that home, or do you say treat Trump like anybody else and they haven't met their burden? What do you think?
More closer to the latter. I don't think you say that there is some new standard because of this. The unprecedented nature of it, I think you say a lot. And I think you just go through the idea that if you have a conspiracy, there's all these acts that are charged in the conspiracy, but somewhere along the line there has to be a crime for it to be a conspiracy. And just go through all of these things and say, these aren't crimes.
Byron, when I have followed this every day the way you have been doing, and Byron has done really yeoman's work in reading the transcripts and trying to interpret it as a smart non-lawyer interprets it. I do not know if they ever made the connection between Trump and the entry in the bookkeeping. I don't. Did they ever have Trump direct somebody to enter it? Because I don't know what's in my books. I'm not the bookkeeper.
They never did. And as a matter of fact, even of the idea that the entries would be put in the Trump books as legal expenses, they've never connected Trump to that. And even the broader thing of the payoff to Cohen in 12 payments of $35,000 each, and then it would be attributed to a retainer. All they have is Michael Cohen's testimony, literally the only thing they have, because Cohen says he was in a meeting with Trump and Alan Weisselberg at Trump Tower, and Weisselberg said that stuff in front of Trump, and that's all they have. It depends entirely on the word of Michael Cohen.
You see, that's what amazes. Andy is focused, McCarthy, our mutual friend and the guy we respect a lot. Andy has been focused a lot on a variety of things that offend him as a lawyer. I've been offended as just a layman not watching as a lawyer saying, wait a minute, Michael Cohen is a lawyer. I've had retainer agreements. I'm under 3 NDAs as we speak. All right. So I've got 3 NDAs from my life, one with the U.S. government, one with NBC, and one with the Washington Post. And there are things I can never tell anyone about those contracts or my time in the federal government because it was official secrecy stuff. And NDAs are just fine. So that's not a problem. Number 2, Cohen was a lawyer. So a bookkeeper, we're paying Cohen, just write it down, attorney's fee. And number 3, I don't know that they ever proved anything about Michael Cohen not doing lawyering on the NDA. Am I just being stupid? Did I miss something?
No, you're totally right. And there are practical reasons for some of this. There was testimony about how the expenses, the payments were filed under legal expenses, and the Trump Organization financial software dated from the early 1990s, and it had when you were listing a payment, it had a drop-down menu of choices of what it could be. And the closest choice they had, it had about 5 choices, there wasn't a lot, was legal expenses. So they're paying Cohen, he's the lawyer, it's legal expenses. Also, the fact is, Cohen performed other services, we know that, it's in his bill, that lawyers do. And by the way, he negotiated and approved and presented the NDA to Trump, which is what lawyers do. So even the fact that they were called legal expenses is actually true, at least for a large portion of the $420,000 involved, if not all of it.
I got to tell you, I do not know how they convict him, but I'm pretty certain they will. Byron York.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I don't know how they get there, but I also think someone's going to talk. Someone's going to make money. The New York Post is going to offer one of these juries a lot. They got a list of where they all live, right? They know everything about these jurors. They won't print it, but they will now, and someone will sell their story. Too much money.
Maybe the National Enquirer could offer them money.
That would be justice. Byron York, thank you. Look forward to watching you on Fox News and reading you at the Washington Examiner. Thank you, Byron.
Okay, thanks.